Clara Mason stepped through the automatic doors of Tokyo Narita Airport just before sunrise, the horizon awash of pale gold spilling across the tarmac. She tugged at the crisp collar of her school uniform, a soft gray blazer over a neatly pressed white blouse, and felt a small rush of pride. Today wasn't just any trip. She was on a special assignment. Tucked discreetly in the inner pocket of her blazer was her quality inspector badge, and in her right hand she held a freshly printed boarding pass for Gate 12. At 12 years old, Clara had never felt more grown up, or more ready. The departure hall lay almost empty in this early hour. Most travelers wouldn't arrive until after the first commuter rush, but Clara and her father, Robert Mason, had arranged for her to board early to test the airline's service protocols. She paused at a floor-to-ceiling window and watched a row of All Nippon Airways aircraft catch the dawn light, their white fuselages glowing orange at the edges. She inhaled, steadying herself against a flutter of nerves in her chest. This mission was both exhilarating and intimidating. She needed to act like any ordinary young passenger, even though she carried inside her pocket a tool that could expose any misstep by the staff. Soft overhead lights illuminated the smooth marble floors as she made her way toward Gate 12. A low murmur of baggage wheels and distant PA announcements flickered in the air. Clara's heart thumped with anticipation and, at the same time, a quiet certainty. She had rehearsed her part 100 times. Smile when greeted, stay calm, be polite. If anything went wrong, she would activate the app on her phone that streamed a live feed of her interactions directly to the executive lounge, where the airline's CEO might intervene. It felt like something out of a spy novel, but this was real life and real responsibility. At the check-in counter for first-class boarding, a single flight attendant stood behind the desk, her posture sharp even in the soft dawn light. Clara approached with measured steps, offering a polite bow and a warm good morning. She kept her phrase bright, her tone confident. Behind her polite exterior, she felt an internal pressure. Her entire assignment hung on this moment. She slipped her boarding pass into view as instructed, careful not to flash her badge. The attendant glanced down at the pass, then up at Clara's uniform. Clara met her eyes directly, holding a steady, yet unassuming gaze. The flight attendant adjusted her navy cap and cleared her throat. Clara faintly heard the distant hum of a rolling suitcase. Two other agents chatted quietly in the background. For a moment, everything felt suspended, the hush before an orchestral crescendo. Clara's pulse sped, but she forced herself to breathe evenly. Beneath her blazer, her fingers brushed the cool metal of her badge. It was a comforting anchor, a reminder of the trust her father had placed in her. She imagined the bright conference room back home where she'd shown her presentation on the inspector program, seen the nods of approval on adult faces. That focus was here with her now. Behind the counter, the flight attendant studied Clara's boarding pass again, her lips pressing into a thin line. Clara swallowed, steadying her expression. She reminded herself, look approachable, remain courteous, don't react to anything that might come. This was about gathering evidence quietly. If the attendant treated her with kindness, great. Clara would note that, too. If not, the live feed would capture the truth. A bead of sweat trickled down the back of her neck. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, ever so slightly. Suddenly, the attendant's hand shot out, grabbing the boarding pass. Clara's breath caught. The attendant's eyes narrowed as she tore the pass sharply in two, the crack of paper echoing across the hall. Clara saw a flicker of surprise on the faces of passing travelers. A few stopped rolling their suitcases to stare. This uniform, the attendant snapped, voice low but hard enough for Clara to feel it like a physical blow, isn't the look we expect for first-class passengers. Her tone was laced with contempt, as though Clara's simple school attire somehow disqualified her from the privilege of premium seating. Clara's cheeks heated with embarrassment, but she refused to let tears come. Instead, she held her head high, meeting the attendant's gaze without flinching. Inside, her heart pounded, partly from indignation, partly from fear, yet she remembered her father's words that morning. Grace under pressure is your greatest strength. Show them who you really are, quietly but firmly. Clara folded the torn edges of the pass and let them rest in her pocket. She knew exactly what to do next. She pressed a discreet button on her phone. Almost instantly, a hush fell over the surrounding travelers. They sensed something in the charged air but couldn't quite place it. On a mounted screen above the gate, the live feed began to play, though the title read simply, "Customer Service Check 45. Clara met the attendant's gaze again, calm and resolute, and said softly, "I believe there's been a mistake. Could we please have another look at my pass?" Her voice was quiet, but carried enough confidence to draw a few curious glances from nearby passengers. The flight attendant blinked, taken aback as her own words were broadcast for internal review. For the first time, her face flickered with self-consciousness. Clara allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. She wasn't acting out of spite. She was showing the world how a true first-class experience should be delivered, with respect and dignity, no matter what someone wears. The attendant's rigid posture softened fractionally, replaced by the flicker of hesitation. Clara knew this moment marked the beginning of change. An authority greater than uniforms or titles now watched from above. As the dawn light grew stronger, painting linear shadows across the floor, Clara readied herself for what came next. She felt the shift in the air. The gate wasn't just a place of departure anymore, but a stage where unseen observers would see if the airline lived up to its promise of excellence. Clara stowed her torn boarding pass, clutched her bag close, and waited. Steady, dignified, and quietly powerful, ready to let the rest of the world see the truth. Clara stood just a few feet from the boarding counter, her posture relaxed but alert. The morning light filtered through the glass walls, painting soft patterns on the polished floor. She could feel the buzz of activity around her, the rise and fall of voices, the shuffle of suitcases, the occasional beeping of a handheld scanner. Yet in the center of it all, she felt a discreet tension, as though the air itself had thickened around her. Clara smoothed the lapel of her gray blazer one more time, mindful of the carefully creased fold. Her school uniform might have looked ordinary on any other 12-year-old, but today it was her armor. From the corner of her eye, she saw the flight attendant, Gloria, glance up and down at her, the woman's lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. Gloria's well-fitted navy blazer, her crisp shirt, her immaculate hairstyle, all screamed professional first-class service. Clara, in contrast, was dressed plainly. Not shabby, but decidedly simple. She imagined what Gloria must have been thinking. Why is this kid in line for first class? Clara suppressed a flare of defensiveness. She reminded herself, no reaction. She detected Gloria leaning in, whispering something to the attendant at the next station. Clara couldn't catch the words, but the attendant across the counter offered a soft but knowing smirk. A ripple of unease slithered through her stomach, and she reminded herself to breathe evenly. She stayed rooted to the spot, chin high, hands clasped in front of her. This was part of the plan, maintain the appearance of a confident, unremarkable customer while the hidden camera on her badge quietly recorded every moment. Gloria returned her gaze to Clara. For an instant, time felt suspended. Clara met her eyes head-on, allowing a polite, gentle smile to play on her lips. Beneath the surface, a storm of questions whirled through her mind. What's the deal with my uniform? Is she really judging me based on my clothes? She felt a hot flush creep up her neck, but she didn't flinch. She reminded herself of her father's words, "You prove your worth with your conduct, not your outfit." So she smiled again and said in a soft, clear voice, "Good morning." Gloria tilted her head slightly, as if recalibrating her assessment. She reached for a clipboard, then paused and glanced at Clara's blouse collar. Clara saw the attendant's brow crease in a frown. She risked a quick scan of the lounge behind Gloria. A handful of other passengers watched, curiosity flickering in their eyes. A single father folding a newspaper looked up. A businesswoman clutching a briefcase frowned. A tourist family exchanged whispered glances. Clara felt herself become the center of a silent performance, and she fought to keep her posture steady. Then Gloria leaned forward, her voice so low Clara almost didn't hear it. "Is that the school uniform you have to wear?" There was an edge to the question, an undertone of condescension that cut deeper than any outright insult. Clara nodded, swallowing the sting in her throat, and replied, "Yes, ma'am. It's my school's uniform." She kept her tone even and respectful, using the very politeness Gloria seemed to doubt. For a moment, Gloria said nothing. She tapped her fingers on the counter, lips pursed tightly. Clara felt the slow churn of her own pulse in her ears, louder than any announcement overhead. She reminded herself silently, "Hold steady. Don't let her rattle you." The hidden camera in her badge was rolling, capturing every detail. Clara's stomach fluttered at the thought. She was doing exactly what she'd been asked, staying calm while gathering proof of any unfair treatment. Gloria finally straightened and let out a short, dismissive cough. "Well, let's see that pass." Clara retrieved the boarding pass from her pocket and extended it with a steady hand. Her fingers brushed the pass gently, careful not to crinkle it. Gloria took it, her eyes scanning the information. Clara watched every microsection, the slight narrowing of her eyes, the tightening of her jaw. Then she looked back at Clara's uniform one more time, lips curling into something between a smirk and a sneer. Clara felt a flicker of indignation, but she refused to give voice to it. Instead, she lowered her gaze politely, watching as Gloria examined the pass. After an excruciating moment, Gloria snapped the pass shut and returned it in 2 neat halves. Clara gasped softly, but kept her composure. "I'm sorry," she said in the same calm tone. "My ticket appears torn. Could I please have another look?" Gloria placed one hand on the counter, one half still in Clara's hand. She rolled her eyes. "Sure, kid," she said, voice loud enough for a few nearby passengers to hear. "Maybe next time you dress like a first-class passenger, you'll get treated like one." The final word, "one," was spat out with such disdain that a hush rippled through the small crowd. Clara's cheeks burned hotter now. An embarrassing roar pulsed behind her ears. But Clara did not cry. She did not shout. She simply folded the half of the pass still in her hand, slipped it into her pocket and looked up. Her eyes were clear, unwavering, quiet strength incarnate. She pressed a discreet button on her phone, activating the live feed. The overhead displays flickered for a heartbeat, then a small Quality Audit Live logo appeared in the corner of the screen above Gate 12. A hush swept through the hall. Passengers leaned forward, intrigued. Clara met Gloria's eyes one last time, offering a small, serene nod. In that moment, everything shifted. The morning light seemed brighter. Clara felt the first stirrings of vindication. She knew that this was just the beginning of the truth coming to light, and that when the world watched, the airline would have to live up to its own standards. And Clara, 12 years old and dressed in a simple school uniform, would stand at the center of it all, quietly but unmistakably powerful. Clara's world narrowed to the small counter between her and the flight attendant. The morning sun slanted through the terminal windows, igniting patches of gold across the polished floor, but Clara hardly noticed. All her focus was on Gloria's face, set in a hard line, eyes cold with judgment. Clara stood perfectly still, her hands folded in front of her, trying to anchor herself against the rush of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. Without warning, Gloria's voice rang out, clipped and sharp. "This uniform isn't good enough for first class." The words sliced through Clara's calm like a hot knife. Heads turned. A few travelers, pausing mid-stride, stared in stunned silence. Clara felt her heart hammer in her chest. It sounded too loud, too rapid. She was sure everyone could hear it. Gloria reached for Clara's boarding pass. Clara's breath caught in her throat as the attendant's fingers closed around the paper. She barely had time to register the grip before she saw the boarding pass tremble, then heard the first, brutal rip. Ripped like tearing a page out of a book you never wanted rewritten. The rip echoed sharply against the tile. Then another rip, and Clara's carefully printed ticket was in two uneven halves. A hot flush of humiliation bloomed across Clara's cheeks. Her stomach pitched. For a heartbeat, she stood frozen, mouth opening and closing, unable to form a protest. Around her, the murmur of the terminal turned sharp, curious. "Did you see that? Why would she do that? Is that kid even supposed to be here?" The buzzing voices felt like bees clawing at her resolve. Clara's eyes darted to the torn edges of the path she still clutched. One half lay flat on the counter, the other half was folded awkwardly in her hand. If she had been any other passenger, she might have crumpled in tears, but Clara had a mission. She pressed her lips together, refusing to let them quiver. Gloria leaned forward, jabbing the two scraps at Clara. "If you want to fly first class, maybe you should dress for it. Or better yet, buy a real ticket next time." Her tone was cruel, tinged with contempt. She straightened abruptly, as if satisfied she had made her point, and turned her attention to the next person in line, leaving Clara behind like refuse. The sting of that insult, "buy a real ticket," cut deeper than the ripped paper. Clara felt the simmering heat of embarrassment surge under her blazer, pooling at her temples. She couldn't meet Gloria's eyes. She dared not look around at the watching crowd. She imagined their thoughts. Who is this spoiled brat? What's she doing here? Suddenly, Clara felt dread wash over her, as though the world had shifted and she no longer belonged anywhere. But beneath that fear, another feeling flickered. Something steely, a tiny spark of defiance. She swallowed hard, tasting the salt of tears that she absolutely refused to shed. Taking a slow breath, Clara forced her shoulders back, lifting her gaze to meet the attendants again. If Gloria thought this would break her, she was in for a surprise. With deliberate calm, Clara held up the half-pass in her hand. "Excuse me," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "My ticket is torn. Could you please give me another look or issue me a new one?" The words were polite, formal, almost absurdly courteous against the backdrop of Gloria's scorn. A hush fell over the little cluster of witnesses. Clara watched as Gloria's lips quivered in irritation, her perfectly coiffed hair swaying as she turned back to face the girl. For a moment, the flight attendant's eyes narrowed, as though she was recalculating how best to humiliate Clara further. But then she simply snorted and leaned back, as if Clara's polite request were a ridiculous inconvenience. "Fine," Gloria snapped, "but don't expect me to apologize for doing my job." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Clara could see a young mother clutching her toddler's hand, eyes wide. A businessman paused in his steps, phone halfway to his ear. Even the attendant at the counter next to them glanced over, frowning. It felt as though the entire terminal had drawn a breath at Clara's expense. Clara swallowed again, her throat tight. She stuffed the half-pass into her pocket and took out her phone with the other hand. She tapped the discreet icon, her quality audit app, fingers not trembling, though her heart still thundered. In that instant, a small red live badge appeared in the corner of the large overhead screen. The terminal's hum suddenly seemed distant. People turned to the screen, then to Clara, then back to the screen. A soft murmur built into a low buzz of curiosity. Gloria's confident posture faltered. She looked up at the screen, and for the first time, Clara saw doubt flash across her features. The attendant's cheeks went pale. Her mouth opened as though she might apologize, but then she snapped it shut. She barked in annoyed, "What is this?" Her voice cracked slightly, betraying her unpreparedness for this turn of events. Clara pressed a finger to her lips in a silent, calming gesture, to herself as much as to Gloria. She raised her chin just a fraction, her eyes steady. The plane's metallic hull gleamed in the distance, visible through the broad windows, but Clara no longer felt small in its shadow. She felt something ignite inside her. The slow burn of righteous indignation, tempered by the certainty that she was on the side of fairness. Travelers whispered among themselves now, some nodding at Clara with sympathy, others shaking their heads in disapproval at Gloria's behavior. A few people pulled out their own phones, aiming them at the scene. Clara realized this moment had outgrown her personal mission. It was no longer just about quality control. It was about one girl standing up against petty cruelty, and no amount of uniform snobbery could take that dignity away. Behind the counter, Gloria straightened her cap and cleared her throat, trying to regain control. But the damage was done. Clara's quiet protest had become the focal point of the terminal. The flight attendant's next move would be watched not just by her supervisors, but by everyone in that hall. Clara tucked her phone away, squared her shoulders, and waited for Gloria to decide what to do next. In that charged silence, you could almost hear the future being written. A story not of a little girl humiliated, but of one who refused to be erased. Clara stood frozen for a moment after the boarding pass was torn in half. The rush of the terminal felt distant. Her focus narrowed to the two jagged pieces of paper clutched between her fingers. Around her, the morning light that had glittered so warmly now felt harsh, spotlighting her humiliation. She could hear the distant clatter of suitcase wheels and the low murmur of passengers speculating what had just happened. But it all blended into a dull roar. Clara drew in a slow, steadying breath and bent to scoop up the fragments of her ticket. As she straightened, Clara pressed the torn edge of the larger half-flat against the counter, careful not to crumple it further. She folded the smaller piece neatly and slipped it back into the front pocket of her blazer. For a heartbeat, she felt the heat of tears pool behind her eyes, a sting she refused to show. She reminded herself of her father's voice, calm and unwavering. "Clara, real strength is shown by what you don't say." Those words echoed inside her chest, a gentle reminder that courage often meant swallowing your pain rather than giving it voice. With that thought, Clara's hand drifted to the inner pocket of her blazer. She withdrew the slender metal badge she had been given, her secret quality inspector ID. The badge caught the light, its engraved logo of the airline's wings glinting brightly. Clara held it between her thumb and forefinger, feeling its cool weight. No one around her would know what it meant, but to Clara, it was a talisman. Proof that she wasn't just a child in a uniform, but an undercover auditor with the authority to demand better. She tucked the badge back into her pocket, pressing it flat against her chest. In that simple movement, she felt a shift inside her, a gathering of resolve that pushed aside the sting of embarrassment. Clara straightened her shoulders, smoothing down the front of her blazer as though making herself presentable for the next step. She kept her head level, her eyes calm and sure. The sting in her throat dulled. She forced a small, polite nod toward the flight attendant. No voice escaped her lips. Instead, Clara allowed her silence to speak. Passengers milling nearby paused their conversations, drawn by the steady calm she radiated. A business traveler slowed his pace as he wheeled past, his eyes flicking toward her with curiosity rather than amusement. A mother, clutching her infant, caught Clara's gaze and offered a sympathetic tilt of the head. Even the flight attendant at the next desk glanced over, brow furrowed, perhaps wondering if she had gone too far. Clara took another slow breath. She planted her feet firmly on the ground and let her hands fall to her sides. The gentle leather of her school shoes felt steady beneath her, grounding her in the moment. Inside her mind, she played the scene as though it were a drawing on a canvas. Her torn ticket, the attendant's harsh words, the ripple of onlookers' stares. Then she wiped that image away and replaced it with a new one. Herself standing tall, badge hidden but powerful, about to do what was necessary to right this wrong. She lifted her chin, setting her jaw with quiet determination. Her father's advice continued to play back in her memory. True power is carried in how you treat others, even when they treat you poorly. Clara could feel the truth of those words settling in her bones. It wasn't enough to simply endure the insult. She had to act with the integrity he had taught her. She would not lash out or break down. Instead, she would let her principles guide her next move. A gentle hush settled over Gate 12 as small clusters of travelers sensed that something important was unfolding. Clara could almost feel the collective breath of the hall waiting on her next step. She resisted the urge to glance back at her father. He was sitting out of view in the executive lounge, trusting her to handle this challenge. She had promised to make him proud, and now was the moment to keep that promise. From the corner of her eye, Clara saw the flight attendant straighten and call over another agent. The attendant's posture was still defensive, but there was a flicker of hesitation, the first sign that Clara's composed silence was having its effect. Clara held her ground, arms relaxed, but ready. She closed her eyes for just a breath, centering herself on the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, then opened them again to meet the attendant's gaze head-on. In that shared look, intensity passed between them. Clara's calm countered the attendant's scowl. Though Clara was smaller in stature, in that instant she felt larger than the bustling terminal around her. She felt the weight of her badge unseen in her pocket and the power of her father's trust behind her. All those years of school uniforms and polite behavior had led to this, an invitation to stand firm when it mattered most. Without a word, Clara shifted her phone to a thumb drive mode and opened the app that would soon broadcast her next move, but she paused before triggering the live feed. This was still the space for quiet strength. She would not leap to action recklessly. Instead, she let the moment stretch, allowing every person in Gate 12 to sense her unspoken resolve. She was more than a kid with a torn ticket. She was a living reminder that decency and fairness deserved respect. Clara glided her fingers back to the badge pocket, pressing it once more against her heart. Then, with nothing more than a determined inhale, she squared her shoulders, ready for the next step, ready to channel her inner strength into a force that would bring the truth into the open. And as she stood there, still and measured, the first stirrings of respect began to ripple through the crowd. Clara pressed her back against the cool metal frame of the boarding counter and pulled her phone from the inner pocket of her blazer. Her fingers trembled just enough to remind her of the stakes. She tapped the Messages app, selected the contact labeled Mr. Mason's assistant, and typed a brief note. Gate 12. Boarding pass torn by Gloria. Starting video log now. She hit send before second-guessing herself. A single check mark appeared almost instantly. Her message had gone through. The tiny confirmation was a lifeline, proof that help was on its way, even if she couldn't see it. Clara slid her thumb across the screen to open the quality audit app her father had installed for today's assignment. Its interface was simple, a large red circle that read "Record" in the middle of her display. She tapped it, and the camera shutter sound emitted quietly, just enough to register in her own ears, but not jarring to those around her. Her phone's screen showed a split view, the live feed from her front-facing camera capturing Gloria's scowl, and a small corner window with a rotating "loading" icon indicating her stream was connecting to the executive lounge's private network. Her heart thundered. The loading icon flitted through 3 rings before turning into a green check mark. Clara exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing by a fraction. On the large digital display above Gate 12, a monitor normally reserved for gate changes and boarding updates, the bottom right corner now bore a discreet watermark, Quality Audit Live. The rest of the terminal's travelers seemed oblivious at first, immersed in their own pre-fleet routines, but a few curious glances flickered toward Clara as she raised her phone just enough to keep Gloria in frame. She steadied her breathing, recalling her training. The key was to remain calm, almost serene, so that Gloria's behavior would stand out in stark contrast. Clara kept her smile gentle and cordial, even as Gloria's lips tightened into a hard line. She edged her phone a little closer, mindful not to draw overt attention to herself. On the screen, she could see tiny thumbnails of two executives in the lounge, a reassuring sign that her stream was reaching decision-makers. A soft buzz ran through Clara's phone. It was a single reply from her father's assistant. Received. CEO is watching. Keep recording. Her chest swelled. She had expected confirmation, but the knowledge that the CEO himself might be tuning in elevated her confidence. She angled the camera slightly to capture the entire space behind Gloria. Passengers shifting uneasily, heads turning at the sound of the camera shutter. A mother pulling her toddler closer. Clara knew these witnesses would matter later. Gloria, meanwhile, had scarcely noticed the shift in atmosphere. She was busy rifling through a stack of boarding passes for the next passenger when she caught sight of Clara's phone. Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing. Clara held her gaze unflinchingly, letting the live stream watermark speak for itself. In that moment, Clara imagined the executives' faces flashing across the lounge screen. Surprise, concern, perhaps even anger at what they were watching. A ripple of whispers fluttered through the small crowd. A businessman in a sharp suit pulled out his own phone, angling it toward Clara and Gloria to capture the scene. An elderly couple leaned in close, murmuring to each other. Even the uniformed security officer standing a few yards away paused in his patrol, eyes fixed on the torn ticket in Clara's hand. Clara felt the weight of every gaze, not in a terrible way, but as proof that the truth was no longer hers alone. It belonged to everyone watching. For her next move, Clara remembered another piece of advice from her father. Show them respect, even when respect isn't shown to you. So she lowered her phone slightly, folded the two pieces of her torn boarding pass neatly in her hand, and offered Gloria her calmest, most respectful look. "I know I belong on this flight," she said softly. "Could we sort this out? I'd like to board on time." The request, though simple, carried a quiet power. The assembled travelers sensed it, a young girl standing her ground with poise, even after public humiliation. A few people nodded in Clara's direction, some offering sympathetic smiles. Clara sewed those expressions into her resolve. She could taste the faint tang of triumph, like biting into a firm, ripe plum, knowing that any further misstep by Gloria would be caught on camera and broadcast straight to the top. Gloria's face flushed a pale pink as she hesitated. She glanced at the monitor displaying the live stream, then back at Clara. Clara caught the attendant's breath hitch in her throat, the first crack in Gloria's professional mask. The attendant squared her shoulders, searching for a retort, but found none that could cut through the growing chorus of disapproval. Instead, Gloria looked away, her gaze flicking toward the flight schedule board, as if she'd rather examine gate changes than face the live evidence of her own behavior. Clara lowered her phone but kept it ready. She tucked it into her blazer, her posture still composed. The hush around Gate 12 spoke volumes. Executives were watching, passengers were watching, and Gloria knew that humiliating a child on camera was no longer acceptable. Clara felt a swell of gratitude toward her father. His trust in her, his willingness to empower her, had given her the tools to stand tall. As a final gesture, Clara picked up the half pass from the counter and laid it gently next to the other half. Then she took a small, deep breath, turned her back to the crowd, and walked toward the waiting area. Her head held high and her resolve shining as brightly as the sunrise outside. Clara caught sight of him before she even registered his face, a tall figure moving with a confident, unhurried stride through the early morning light that streamed across Gate 12. She had seen a photo of her father 1,000 times, his salt and pepper hair, the subtle crinkles at the corners of his eyes, but nothing prepared her for the calm authority he radiated in person. Robert Mason wore a simple navy overcoat over a tailored suit. his expression composed, almost serene. In the instant he appeared, the entire atmosphere of the terminal shifted. Flight attendants straightened, station agents paused mid-tack, even the security officer on patrol slowed his walk. Clara watched as heads turned politely away, then quickly averted their gaze as if respecting a private moment. A young gate agent, who earlier had offered Clara a sympathetic look, froze completely, eyes wide before lowering his chin in a small nod of recognition. Her heart lodged in her throat, and for a heartbeat Clara wondered if she was imagining it. But then she saw his gaze fall on her, warm, reassuring, alive with pride. And she knew she wasn't. Relief washed through her like a tide. All the tension of the past few minutes, the scorn, the humiliation, the determination, suddenly felt anchored by his presence. Robert made his way to the counter with measured steps. No entourage, no dramatic fanfare, just a quiet dignity that spoke louder than any announcement over the PA. Nearby travelers whispered among themselves, "Isn't that the Mason who owns the airline? I heard he rarely shows up in public." Clara's pulse sped again, but this time from the thrill of solidarity rather than fear. He paused just behind Clara's shoulder, hand resting gently on the small of her back. Clara leaned into the touch, drawing strength from his steady confidence. She dared to look at the flight attendant. Once more. Gloria had gone pale at the sight of him, her bravado replaced by a flicker of panic. Clara felt a spark of satisfaction, but held it in check. Her father's arrival wasn't about spectacle. It was about restoring decency. Robert addressed Gloria in a calm, even tone. "I understand there's been a misunderstanding here. Could we have a word?" He nodded toward Clara's torn boarding pass lying in two haphazard halves on the counter. Gloria swallowed, her hands trembling as she straightened her cap. She muttered something that might have been an apology, but Clara couldn't catch it over the sudden hush that had fallen. A station manager materialized at Robert's side, as if drawn by an invisible thread. Richard, the familiar face Clara had seen scanning boarding passes earlier, looked both stunned and deferential. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Mason, what can I do for you?" Robert glanced at Clara, then back to Richard. "My daughter's boarding pass was destroyed without cause," he said, voice low but firm. "I'd like to know why, and I'd appreciate it if you could resolve this swiftly." The use of "my daughter" was deliberate. He made it clear they were family. Richard's eyes flickered to Clara, then back to Robert, and he blinked as though waking from a sudden daze. He bowed his head, then squared his shoulders. "Sir, you have every right to ask. Please allow me a moment." Richard turned on his heel and strode toward an office door just down the hall. The gate agents exchanged glances, a ripple of recognition passing among them. Even Gloria followed Richard's retreating back, her posture strained. Clara felt a swell of pride at her father's quiet command of the situation. He wasn't raising his voice. He wasn't making a scene. He simply stood by her side, his presence enough to set things right. Clara allowed herself a small, private smile. She glanced up at the display screen over the gate. The Quality Audit Live watermark still glowed faintly in the corner, reminding everyone that the entire incident was on record. She looked back at him. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered, her voice soft with gratitude. Robert gave her a reassuring squeeze. "You handled yourself beautifully," he replied. "I'm proud of you." While Richard disappeared briefly into the back office, Robert crouched to Clara's level and brushed a loose strand of hair from her forehead. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly, genuine concern flickering in his eyes. Clara nodded, swallowing back the last of her rattled nerves. "I am, now," she said. They stood together, father and daughter, a picture of understated strength. Clara drew in a deep breath, letting the warmth of his support fill her chest. This was the kind of power she had only glimpsed from afar, quiet, unassuming, yet absolutely undeniable. It reminded her of the hidden forces she'd been trained to wield: evidence, dignity, and the silent promise that justice would follow. In that moment, Clara realized the significance of what they'd created together. The torn boarding pass, the live video feed, and now Robert's protective arrival formed a seamless chain of accountability. The flight attendant's cruelty would not go unaddressed, not with the full weight of the airline's ownership arrayed behind Clara. Richard returned almost immediately, accompanied by 2 more managers. They carried a pristine boarding pass in its protective sleeve. Richard offered it forward with a respectful bow. "Miss Mason, here is your replacement pass for first class," he said, voice earnest. Clara accepted it with a courteous nod, her fingers brushing the paper gently as though it were a fragile promise. Robert rose to his full height and addressed the group. "Thank you, Richard. Please ensure that Miss Mason is given every courtesy for the remainder of her journey. And let's review our training protocols. This kind of incident cannot happen again." His tone left no room for argument. The managers and Gloria herself nodded rapidly, murmuring apologies. Clara watched as Gloria ducked her head in shame. The flight attendant's shoulders sagged, her moment of haughty triumph completely overturned by forces she had neither seen nor respected. Clara felt a pang of empathy for Gloria, even as she stood firm in her own right. She knew everyone made mistakes. What mattered was how they learned from them. Robert glanced back at Clara with a soft smile. "Shall we?" he said, gesturing toward the jet bridge. Clara slipped her phone into her pocket, her badge safely tucked away. She matched his calm stride as they walked side by side into the waiting aircraft, leaving behind the stunned murmur of Gate 12. As they passed through the threshold, Clara let herself breathe freely for the first time that morning. The sun had climbed higher now, flooding the gate area with warmth, and though the day had begun with humiliation, it was ending in a very different light, one of quiet victory, shared pride, and the unshakable knowledge that even the smallest person could stand tall when armed with truth and love. Clara trailed just behind her father as they stepped off the gate area's bright tile into a quieter corridor painted in soft beige and muted taupe. A discreet sign overhead pointed the way to the ANA Suite Lounge, and a sharply dressed attendant stepped forward to hold the door open. Clara felt the tension of the last hour ebb away the moment she crossed the threshold. Plush armchairs upholstered in pale gray corduroy lined the walls, and an artful arrangement of orchids sat on a low table by the window, their delicate blooms catching the late morning light. Here, the world seemed to slow. Robert Mason offered Clara a small, reassuring squeeze on the shoulder before turning to the station manager who had escorted them. "Thank you for arranging this," he said quietly. Clara noticed Richard's shoulders hunched in apology, his once confident posture diminished. He tapped the name tag on his lapel. "Richard Sato, station manager," then offered a slight bow. "Mr. Mason." "Miss Mason," he began, voice low and earnest. "On behalf of ANA, I want to express my deepest apologies for what happened at Gate 12. No passenger should ever be treated that way." He clasped his hands in front of him, eyes locked on Clara as if he were pleading for her understanding. Clara's throat tightened. She had rehearsed nothing for this moment. She trusted her father to guide her. She inhaled gently and let her shoulders drop. The hush inside the lounge felt protective, as though its soft carpet were wrapping around her. She realized she was trembling just slightly, not from fear anymore, but from the raw emotion of being truly acknowledged. Richard gestured toward 2 seats near a low coffee table. "Please, have a seat." He moved to sink into an armchair himself, smoothing his suit jacket as he did. Behind him, a small buffet of pastries and fruit glowed invitingly under a warm lamp. Robert and Clara sat. Clara chose the chair with her back to the window, preferring to face Richard directly. As she settled in, Robert took the opportunity to fold the napkin on his lap before turning to his daughter. He gave her a proud nod, subtle encouragement to speak her mind. Clara felt the weight of the moment pressed gently on her chest. This was her chance not only to receive an apology, but to offer her perspective. She drew in a steadying breath and looked up at Richard. "Thank you," she said softly. "I appreciate that you're sorry. I didn't expect to be torn down like that." She folded her hands neatly in her lap, speaking with the quiet dignity her father had taught her. "I came here as a regular customer, hoping for a smooth first solo flight. Instead, I felt judged for my uniform. I want you to understand how painful it is to be singled out like that." Richard's face clouded with regret. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, as if closing the gap between them. "Miss Mason, you're absolutely right. Our team failed you," he admitted. "I'm conducting retraining sessions starting this afternoon. Everyone, by tomorrow morning, will undergo updated service training with an emphasis on unconscious bias and respect for all passengers." He punctuated the promise with a firm nod. "I want to make sure no one else has to endure what you did." Clara's pulse slowed as relief washed through her. She felt a warm glow of satisfaction. Her silent stand had led to real action. She glanced at her father, whose expression was a mask of calm pride, and felt that familiar spark of confidence reignite. Robert cleared his throat. "Richard, thank you for taking swift action," he said. His tone was even, but Clara sensed the weight behind his words. "I'd also like to review the feedback loop on these training sessions. My daughter and I are both interested in ensuring this change is meaningful, not just a box to check." He turned to Clara with a supportive smile. "Clara, would you like to share any thoughts on how the airline could improve its service experience?" Clara took a breath to steady herself. She had spent years observing customer service in her weekend shifts at her mother's bakery, and at 12 she already had ideas. "I think employees need more context about why people dress differently," she began. "Some of us wear uniforms, some wear thrifted clothes, and some wear designer brands. But everyone deserves respect. Maybe there could be a regular team exercise where attendants hear real passenger stories. Why someone chose first class, what they're celebrating, or what challenges they're facing." Richard's eyes brightened. "That's a brilliant idea," he said. "Personal storytelling could really humanize our passengers." He reached for a pen and pulled a notepad from his pocket, jotting down her suggestion. "We'll pilot that in next week's training module." Clara allowed herself a small smile. The tingling warmth in her chest reminded her that her voice mattered. She realized she wasn't just a child in distress. She was a catalyst for positive change. A hush fell as a lounge attendant quietly refilled the teapot nearby. Clara watched the steam rise in a lazy spiral, feeling the calm assurance of restored dignity. Robert reached out and squeezed her hand. "Well done, Clara," he murmured. Clara nodded, letting her shoulders relax fully for the first time since she'd arrived at the airport. She closed her eyes briefly, savoring the moment. The soft murmur of the lounge, the gentle glow of morning sunshine, the knowledge that her experience would lead to something better. Richard folded up his notepad and rose. "Mr. and Miss Mason, your feedback is invaluable. You both are welcome back here anytime, and I'll follow up personally on our progress." He paused, offering one last solemn bow. "Thank you for helping us uphold the standards we promise our passengers." Clara and her father stood. Robert offered another quiet handshake, then turned to Clara with a warm twinkle in his eye. She felt safe, seen, and heard, all the things she hadn't at Gate 12. As they headed back toward the elevator that would take them to the jet bridge, Clara tucked her badge into her blazer pocket one last time, carrying it not just as a tool, but as a symbol of her own quiet strength and the power of speaking up. When they emerged back into the bustling terminal, Clara's steps were light. She glanced one final time at the doorway of the ANA Suite Lounge, its calm interior a stark contrast to the chaos beyond. And for the first time that day, she allowed herself to believe that sometimes the smallest voice, spoken calmly and clearly, could change an entire crew's attitude and, ultimately, the culture of an airline. Robert and Clara had barely settled into the soft leather wingback chairs of the ANA Suite Lounge when Robert's phone buzzed insistently in his coat pocket. He glanced at the screen, a secure executive line, and tapped the answer icon without a word. Clara watched him unfold himself from his seat, sliding onto the low coffee table beside him so she could still hear the conversation. The gentle hum of the lounge faded to a low background murmur as Robert's voice dropped to a calm, authoritative tone. "Margot, it's Rob," he said, using the code name for his executive assistant. Clara recognized the familiar cadence, concise, measured, leaving no room for misunderstanding. "We have a situation at Gate 12. Flight attendant Gloria Ito has torn my daughter's boarding pass in half and humiliated her in public. I want Gloria suspended immediately, pending a full investigation. Issue my daughter a new first-class boarding pass and have her escorted directly to the jet bridge. Copy me on the message. Thank you." Clara felt a thrill of relief pulse through her chest. Her father's words were quiet, but they carried the weight of 45% ownership. In the briefest instant, she could feel the gears of the airline's bureaucracy shift in motion. She caught a glimpse of the station manager, Richard, pressed against the glass wall of the adjacent conference room, peering in as though enchanted by the power flowing through Robert's call. The response came through Robert's earpiece almost immediately. "Understood," Margot's voice crackled softly. "Gloria Ito is being removed from duty now. An interim attendant is en route. Replacement pass is printing at Gate 12, she added, her tone businesslike. CEO has been alerted. He'll review the surveillance feed in 10 minutes. I'll copy you on the email." Robert acknowledged the instructions and ended the call. He turned back to Clara, his expression unchanged, calm, supportive, utterly steady. "They're taking care of it," he said simply. He patted her hand. "Would you like some tea while we wait?" Clara nodded, grateful for the normalcy of that small gesture. As a lounge attendant quietly poured hot green tea into fine porcelain cups, Clara's thoughts raced through the last hour, the torn ticket, the live feed on the gate monitor, the stinging words that had tried to break her. By now those moments felt distant, as though her father's call had drawn a protective ring around her. Across the lounge, Robert's phone buzzed again. He checked the screen and nodded. They've suspended Gloria pending review. They've also dispatched a uniformed attendant to Gate 12 with your new pass. Clara watched the clerk scribble a note on a digital pad, then forward it to a runner in the lounge's hallway. Minutes later, a crisp first-class boarding pass, engraved with Clara's name and seat number, arrived on a silver tray. The attendant presented it with a bow, her demeanor respectful, apologetic even. Clara folded the new pass into her pocket, her fingers brushing the smooth cardstock. A soft warmth spread through her. Relief, yes, but deeper still, a sense of vindication. She glanced at the lounge's muted window, where the sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows across the runway. Earlier that morning, the world had felt unsteady beneath her feet. Now, it felt solid and secure, anchored by her father's quiet decisiveness. Robert leaned back, folding his hands over his teacup. "You did exactly the right thing," he told her. "You stayed calm, gathered evidence, and let the process work. I'm proud of you." Clara smiled, but genuine. She felt a surge of gratitude for the trust he'd placed in her, for empowering her to act. It wasn't just about having the badge or a powerful father. It was about standing up with integrity, even when it was scary. In the distance, Clara heard her phone ping with a new message from the airline's internal network. Gate 12 update. Incident resolved. Passenger Clara Mason escorted to jet bridge. Suspension notice sent to Ms. Ito. Full report to follow. She showed the message to her father, who nodded approvingly. Clara tucked her phone away. The moment of crisis had passed. Ahead lay the flight itself, but more important was what she had learned. That one thoughtful call, made quietly and firmly, could set right a wrong and restore dignity, not just for her, but for anyone who witnessed it. Less than an hour after Clara and her father slipped away from the ANA Suite Lounge, Gate 12 erupted anew. This time not with the hushed tension of a live audit feed, but with the insistent ping of incoming notifications. An airline employee, horrified by what they'd witnessed, had quietly captured snippets of Clara's video stream and posted them to a private staff channel. From there, the footage spread like wildfire, first to airline executives' phones, then onto public social media under the hashtag NotJustADress, and before long, every platform was alive with the story of the flight attendant who tore up a little girl's ticket. Clara was already seated in her first-class cabin, settling into the plush leather and inhaling the faint scent of fresh linens when her phone vibrated again. She glanced at the screen, dozens of alerts, messages from concerned classmates, tags from strangers praising her composure, and reposts from major news outlets. Her heart caught in her throat, but not with fear. This was the reaction she had hoped for. Justice, she realized, was no longer silent. It was a chorus of voices rallying behind her. On Twitter, the clip had already been retweeted thousands of times, accompanied by comments like, "This little girl deserved respect," and "How dare you judge a passenger by her uniform?" On Instagram, influencers reposted the video to their stories, urging viewers to demand an apology from ANA and support fair treatment for all flyers. A prominent travel blogger captioned the clip, "Airline service is about respect, not labels, not just a dress." Meanwhile, internal discussions at the airline headquarters shifted into overdrive. Emails pinged executives' inboxes with subject lines such as "Emergency viral incident at Narita" and "Immediate PR response required." The CEO, who had been watching the live stream minutes earlier, now found himself fielding calls from board members, anxious about the brand's reputation. Within the span of a few clicks, what had begun as Clara's quiet, covert audit had become a public reckoning. Back in her seat, Clara scrolled through comments, feeling a swell of gratitude. She tapped a reply to one message, "Thank you. It's not about the uniform, it's about dignity." She paused before posting, then added, "I hope everyone who felt judged today can know they matter." That small act, her first direct response, crystallized the moment. Her private mission had grown into something bigger, a movement for decency in an industry built on service. Across the cabin, Robert watched his daughter's screen with a satisfied nod. He sipped his tea quietly, his composure unwavering. "You did well, Clara," he said softly. "You turned a painful moment into an opportunity for everyone to learn." Clara looked up, eyes bright. She felt a quiet pride, but also a hopeful anticipation of what might come next. Down in Gate 12, the station manager, Richard, and his team had improvised a makeshift viewing station on laptops and tablets. They watched the video, their faces pinched with embarrassment and determination. Within minutes, Richard was drafting a formal statement, apologizing for the attendant's behavior, outlining steps for disciplinary action, and announcing an expedited diversity and service training program. That same statement was posted on the airline's official channels, accompanied by the CEO's message. "We fall short of our own standard when prejudice finds its way into our service. We are committed to change." Passengers arriving at Narita that afternoon found the airport abuzz with the news. Screens in the terminal displayed the apology, and staff wore badges reading, "I listen and I care," in a deliberate gesture of renewed commitment. Some travelers paused to read the statement, nodding approvingly. A mother with her 2 children even showed Clara's brother, a student on a later flight, the video and said, "Even in a moment like this, you can choose kindness." For Clara, the real impact came in the form of direct messages from people who had suffered similar humiliations. Guests at fine restaurants, customers in luxury hotels, even a businesswoman who had once been shamed for wearing a hand-me-down coat. They wrote to thank her for drawing attention to the broader problem. Reading those messages, Clara felt a surge of hope. If her small act of standing firm could resonate so widely, maybe it could spark genuine change in how people treated one another every day. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the Tokyo skyline and the city lights began to twinkle, Clara and her father landed safely at their destination. Disembarking, they walked through the jet bridge under soft overhead lights. Clara's mind buzzed with the day's whirlwind events. Humiliation at Gate 12, the secret audit, her father's intervention, and now this public outcry for fairness. They paused at the exit, where a group of young airline recruits recognized Clara and shyly offered apologies. One of them handed Clara a printed copy of the airline's new service charter, a glossy pamphlet promising respect, equality, and empathy for every passenger. Clara tucked it into her bag, feeling that emblem of reform was tangible proof that her voice had mattered. Outside the terminal, Robert hailed a car. As they settled into the back seat, Clara gazed out at the runway, now illuminated by floodlights and dotted with planes preparing for night flights. She took a deep breath and turned to her father. "Dad, do you think this will really change things?" she asked. He placed a gentle hand on her knee. "I do. Today, everyone in this company saw the truth. They saw how one small act of prejudice can hurt, and how one calm, resolute voice can make it better. Change isn't always instant, but it starts with moments like this." Clara leaned back, her emotions a blend of exhaustion, relief, and cautious optimism. The chapter of her morning's embarrassment had closed with resounding clarity. Prejudice had been exposed, accountability had been demanded, and the seeds of transformation had been sown. She closed her eyes, letting the hum of the city night wrap around her, confident that the sun would rise on a kinder, more respectful world. Clara settled into the plush leather seat of her first-class cabin, the gentle hum of the engines, a soothing counterpoint to the whirlwind that had been her morning. She tucked her neatly folded boarding pass into the seat pocket in front of her, its crisp new edges a sharp contrast to the jagged halves she'd clutched back at Gate 12. Beside her, her father, Robert Mason, leaned back with a satisfied sigh, his gaze sweeping the cabin with the calm assurance of someone who knew the world was righting itself, one small step at a time. Moments earlier, at Gate 12, station manager Richard Sato had delivered official word to everyone within earshot. Gloria Ito was suspended immediately, pending a full inquiry into her conduct. Clara hadn't been present. Her father had insisted she move ahead to the aircraft while he finalized the details, but she could still feel the reverberations of his command. Whispers had swirled through the terminal as Richard read the statement aloud. "Effective immediately, Ms. Gloria Ito is suspended from all duties. An internal review will determine further disciplinary action. We apologize unreservedly to Miss Mason and any passenger who experienced disrespectful treatment." That public apology, backed by the weight of half the company in her father's hands, had been a balm to Clara's wounded pride. Though she never sought a dramatic confrontation, the soft but firm tenor of Richard's words felt like official vindication. The sting of being judged for her school uniform had already begun to fade. Now the cabin attendant approached Clara with a warm, contrite smile and a fresh cup of jasmine tea on a silver tray. "Miss Mason, I want to apologize again on behalf of ANA," she said quietly, offering the tea just within reach. Clara took it, fingering the delicate porcelain handle. "Thank you," she replied, her voice calm. I appreciate that." As the plane taxied toward the runway, Clara sipped the fragrant tea. The subtle sweetness and gentle warmth eased the last of her tension, the liquid acting as a bridge between the turmoil of the morning and the serenity of this moment. She glanced out the window at the orderly rows of runway lights receding behind them and felt the final threads of embarrassment snap loose. Across the aisle, Robert folded his hands in his lap and looked at Clara with pride. "They handled it," he said softly. "That apology was genuine." Clara nodded, recalling the precise phrasing he had insisted upon. No vague regrets, but an outright admission of wrongdoing. She remembered Richard's earnest vow to update training protocols, to hold every staff member accountable. Those promises weren't empty gestures. She had seen the immediate action taken, and that knowledge settled her spirit like a rock in running water. A few moments later, the cabin crew came around to deliver Clara's replacement boarding pass, this time bound by a small gold ribbon and stamped with Miss Mason, Seat 1A. The attendant placed it gently on her tray table. Clara picked it up, sliding the ribbon between her fingers, and smiled. Even this little flourish felt meaningful, an acknowledgement that her dignity mattered. The attendant paused, offering Clara a genuine look of empathy. "I'm so sorry this happened," she said softly. "Thank you for handling it so gracefully." Grace. Clara considered the word. It was at the heart of everything her father had taught her about leadership. Maintain your composure, meet cruelty with compassion, and let truth speak louder than anger. She had felt the old surge of fear and humiliation in the terminal, but now those emotions had been transformed, catalyzed by accountability into something stronger, steadier. As the aircraft climbed above the clouds, Clara looked back on her flight path thus far. She had arrived at the gate with excitement tinged by nervousness, faced scorn for her uniform, found the courage to gather her evidence, and then watched in awe as her father's call rippled through the airline's leadership. Now, in the upper atmosphere where the only voices were hushed announcements and the occasional clink of a teacup, she felt an unshakable calm. Her phone buzzed with one last message from the airline's internal network. Final report: suspension confirmed, training revisions approved. Ms. Mason's feedback has been incorporated into the new service guidelines. Thank you for helping us improve. Clara exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She showed the message to her father, whose expression was a mixture of relief and pride. "You see," he said, smiling, "you made a real difference." She leaned her head on the headrest, feeling the gentle, rhythmic pressure of the seat's motion as the plane leveled off. Her heart swelled with that quiet satisfaction, knowing that one small person, armed with composure and truth, could earn accountability from one of the world's largest airlines. She let her eyes drift shut, imagining the faces back on the ground. Station agents flipping through the updated training manual. Flight attendants wearing new "I listen and I care" pins. Passengers greeted with more genuine warmth. Below her, the world unrolled in a tapestry of towns and cities, lights glittering like distant constellations. Clara understood now that immediate accountability wasn't just a one-time event. It was the first step toward lasting change. She pictured the airline's next training session, her suggestion of passenger storytelling woven into the curriculum, and the ripple effect it could have on countless journeys. Robert reached over and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "Ready for dessert?" he asked. She nodded, and the attendant swept in with a tray of fresh fruit and pastries. Clara selected a small piece of yuzu tart, the sweet tart flavor a fitting capstone to the morning's bittersweet drama. As Clara ate, she allowed herself a final thought. This was more than a victory over one flight attendant's prejudice. It was proof that kindness and respect could be enforced through quiet resolve and unwavering integrity. She felt the last residue of humiliation wash away, replaced by a soft, enduring peace. The plane settled into its cruising altitude, and Clara leaned back in her seat, sipping the last of her tea. Somewhere down below, the airline's wheels were already in motion. Updated policies drafted, staff retrained, messages of apology echoed through the terminals. And here, drifting among the clouds, one little girl in a simple school uniform was free to dream about all the places she would go, knowing that no matter what she wore, she deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. Clara's first-class seat felt more like a cozy armchair in a private study than an airplane cabin. The plush upholstery cradled her as she leaned back, watching the gentle curve of the clouds drifting past the side window. Sunlight filtered in, warming her cheeks, and for the first time all day she allowed herself to truly exhale. Her father sat beside her, upright and composed, his own gaze fixed on the horizon beyond the wings. He had ordered another round of green tea, and the soft clink of porcelain cups against saucers punctuated the cabin's hush. Clara took a careful sip, savoring the familiar, comforting bitterness. It grounded her, reminding her that the turmoil at Gate 12 now felt like a distant storm that had long since broken. "Today was a big day," Robert said quietly, folding his hands on his lap. His voice carried that same calm authority she'd seen at the lounge and at the gate, when he'd set things right with just a single phone call. Clara nodded, her thoughts still swirling through every moment. The scorn of Gloria's words, the crack of torn paper, the hush that fell when her live stream took over the terminal. "It was," she agreed, tracing a finger along the rim of her cup. "I never expected to have that much power just by staying calm." She smiled, a small, genuine curve of her lips. It felt strange, in a good way. Robert returned her smile. It's easy to think that power always comes with loud voices or grand gestures, but sometimes the greatest force is quiet confidence, and the willingness to stand up for yourself with dignity. He paused, watching a skyrider's trail fade into the blue. "You demonstrated both today." Clara's chest swelled with pride. She remembered how nervous she'd been back at Gate 12, how her stomach had twisted into knots. But when that boarding pass tore and everyone stared, she had remembered his words. Real strength was shown by what you didn't say. And she had chosen restraint over tears, poise over panic. That choice had rippled outward, setting off a chain of events she still found almost unbelievable. She glanced at her torn slip, now replaced, ribbon-bound and pristine, in her lap, and then up at her father. "Dad, what happens next?" she asked. "Gloria's suspended, training's updated, but how do we make sure it sticks?" Robert took a slow breath. "Change takes persistence. One incident can spark reform, but it's the follow-through that makes it real." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a slim folder stamped with the airline's crest. "I've asked HR to share the revised service manual with you too. I want your input on the passenger story module you suggested." He slid the folder across. "I'm building a leadership workshop for young people, kids like you, and I'd like you to co-host a session. Think of it as a mini next-gen leaders in service course." Clara's eyes brightened. She lifted the folder, flipping it open to reveal bullet points. Introduction to unconscious bias. Storytelling exercises in empathy. Role-playing scenarios for service excellence. Group reflections and action planning. She traced the lines with her fingertip, feeling a new spark of excitement. "Me? Teach a workshop?" Her voice hitched, in the best way. Half surprise, half eagerness. Robert nodded. "You've already shown leadership today. You had the courage to speak up, quietly, and guide people toward a better way. Now I want you to help others discover that same courage." He leaned back, eyes warm. "You've got a gift for understanding how people feel. You felt that mother's sympathy in the lounge, the way passengers rallied online. That empathy is your greatest asset." Clara paused, letting his words sink in. In her mind, she replayed the mother in the lounge, the businessman who snapped a photo, the recruits who apologized as she left the terminal. She realized how all those gestures had comforted her, and how, in turn, she could offer comfort and guidance. "I'd like that," she said. Her voice was steady, brimming with determination. "I want to help people see each other's humanity." Robert smiled proudly and raised his teacup in a gentle toast. "To your first workshop," he said. Clara clinked her cup against his, the sound high and clear, echoing softly through the cabin. They sipped their tea in companionable silence, the kind that only comes from deep understanding. Outside, the plane soared above a vast sea of clouds, but Clara felt grounded, rooted in purpose, buoyed by family, and inspired to help others. After a few moments, she closed the folder, carefully tucking it into her lap. She glanced at her father and asked, "When do we start planning?" Robert placed a hand over hers. "When we land, we'll set a date. Between us, we'll draft the curriculum. You'll share your experiences and I'll bring in the experts." He winked. "And I'll handle the logistics. Venues, materials, all that adult stuff." Clara laughed, a bright, clear sound that felt like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Deal." As the flight attendant passed by to refill their water glasses, Clara thought about the journey she'd been on. From the flush of humiliation at the gate, through the secret live audit, to the public apology, and now this quiet moment of shared ambition. It had been a roller coaster of emotions: shock, shame, resolve, relief, pride, and now settled into something new, a sense of purpose that went beyond herself. She met her father's gaze, grateful for his steadfast presence. He had trusted her to stand alone at Gate 12 and then stood by her side, guiding the airline to make things right. Now they would pay that trust forward, equipping other young leaders to do the same. Clara leaned back and looked out the window at the shifting colors of the sky. She felt peace in her heart, a calm certainty that even small voices could echo loudly when lifted with integrity. And beneath that peace, a deep yearning to learn, to teach, and to spark the same quiet courage in others. As the plane cut through a bank of clouds and daylight broke into a radiant glow, Clara knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning of her journey, as a daughter, as an auditor, and as a young leader determined to change the world, one act of dignity at a time. Clara clicked her phone camera off airplane mode and raised it to frame her face, the soft afternoon light filtering in through the window beside her seat. She settled into her first-class cushion, feeling the gentle hum of the cabin around her. The swish of the passing clouds outside reminded her how far she'd come, both in miles and in confidence, since that tense moment at Gate 12. "Hi everyone," she began, offering the camera a warm, easy smile. "Clara Mason here. If you've watched my story so far, you know this morning didn't start out great. My boarding pass was torn up by a flight attendant who judged me by my uniform, but thanks to a little quiet resolve and, yes, a certain quality inspector badge, you saw how things turned around." She paused, letting her tone stay conversational, like chatting with friends over coffee. "I am so grateful for everyone who's reached out with support and shared your own stories of being judged unfairly." She reached down and pulled the ribbon-tied replacement pass from her pocket, holding it up so viewers could see its crisp edges. "This little thing is more than just paper," she said. "It's a reminder that dignity matters, no matter what you're wearing. Whether you're in a school uniform, thrifted jeans, or a designer dress, you deserve respect." Player leaned closer, her expression earnest. "I've been reading your comments. Parents telling me how their kids got teased for old sneakers, professionals who faced snide remarks over hand-me-downs, travelers who worried their attire would mark them as less than. You all reminded me this isn't just about one little girl at one gate in one airport. It's about all of us." She flipped the camera to show the cabin behind her, the empty row of seats, the polished metal accents, the flight attendant quietly offering tea to another passenger down the aisle. See that? This airline is already changing uniforms, training, and service standards so that no one else goes through what I did. That's the power of speaking up calmly, and having my dad, the airline owner, back me up. She giggled, then winked. Yes, that part was a bit of an advantage, but keep reading. I'll share tips for how you can stand your ground, badge or no badge. She tapped the screen to flip back to her face and leaned in, voice dropping to a friendly whisper. So, here's what I want to know from you. Have you ever been judged by your clothes, your accent, or just how you look? How did you handle it? Tell me in the comments below. She held up 2 fingers and grinned. I'll be reading every single one, maybe even pin a few to share in my next video. Clara leaned back and let a thoughtful silence hang for a beat, then picked up a small notebook she'd tucked into her lap. I'm also starting a mini next-gen leaders in service workshop soon, she continued, tapping the notebook with excitement. We'll talk about empathy, bias, and how to speak up with respect. If you're interested in joining, or if your school or youth group wants to set something up, drop me a DM. She tapped her phone's screen for emphasis. Let's keep this conversation going offline, too. She ended with her signature sign-off, upbeat and sincere. Thanks for being part of this journey, everyone. If you believe in respect over judgment, hit like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss what's next. Share this video with anyone who needs a boost of confidence today. Clara held up 2 fingers in a playful peace sign. Stay kind, stay curious, and remember, our clothes don't define us, our actions do. Silent justice. Not just a dress, she said, then blew a quick kiss at the camera. She tapped the screen to stop the recording. She lowered her phone and exhaled, a soft smile spreading across her face. Turning to her father, who'd been quietly reading a news alert about the viral response, she said, "Ready to land?" Robert closed his tablet, folding it neatly. "Absolutely," he replied, pride twinkling in his eyes. "And I think we've just set the stage for something really special." Clara nodded, slipping her phone back into her blazer pocket. As the plane began its descent, she gazed out the window at the tapestry of cities and rivers below, feeling a ripple of hope. Today's chapter had closed on a high note of engagement and empowerment, and she couldn't wait to see how far the story would go next.